Shalom, 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 ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a live episode of Faith Walk, the intersection of life and faith. It is Wednesday, July 10th, 2024, and it is a great day to be alive and well. And we thank our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ for giving us a new day today. Okay, I'm hearing. Okay, hold on a second. I totally forgot. I'm trying to do a new thing, and obviously this new thing isn't working because I can hear it. Um, okay. What I'm trying to do is when people comment on, well, don't comment. So I might as well say this now. When people don't comment, but they're watching the show, I don't know if they're watching. And I wanted to be able to shout people out. So I'm not sure if YouTube and Facebook, because I can only see when people are commenting on StreamYard, which is the platform that we're streaming from. But if there's people who are watching and maybe it doesn't pick up on StreamYard, but it picks up on Facebook and YouTube. So I had another YouTube tab open to see if I could watch it. But of course, when it came on, I had to turn the audio off. And so I had to turn it off after it came on. So that's why you heard, if you heard it, I don't know. You could be saying, what is she talking about? I heard the audio of YouTube while I was talking. So that's what that was about. If you heard it and if you didn't, that's what I'm talking about. All right. So this is Faith Walk, the intersection of life and faith, July 10th, 2024. And we thank our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ for being the one who got us up this morning and the one who keeps us every single day that we live. So we give him honor, glory, and praise for that and everything else because he's a good God. And we have Robin Woods, who is the first person in the chat today. Hi, Robin. How are you? Miss you. Good evening. She says, good evening, Sharon, Sandra, and Dr. Walters. Thank you so much, Robin, for joining us this evening. And if you are watching via Facebook or YouTube, please like the video and share the video. Don't keep all this wonderfulness to yourself. And please like the page if you're watching via Facebook or subscribe to the channel. It helps us to grow the platform if you subscribe. If and this is just not my channel on YouTube, and it might be on Facebook as well. But what happens is more people who aren't subscribed to the channel watch the show every week versus people who are subscribed, which we think it will be the other way around. So let's get the subscribership up. So therefore, maybe that number can switch. Oftentimes we find that people watch the show, but they don't subscribe. It doesn't cost any money. Just click the button and you subscribe to the channel. Or like the Facebook page. Hey, honey bunches, how are you? Thank you for logging on. Robin Wood says, miss you too, Sharon. So that is my intro. Make sure you please subscribe, like, and share, and like the video as well. Tonight we have Dr. Walters back on the show by popular demand. We got so many text messages and emails and phone calls about his first day on Faith Walk back in June, talking about Black women and their fathers, which is the topic tonight, part 2. And so he's back on by popular demand. So while he's talking, put your questions in the chat because he's going to do a little bit of talking and then he's going to take all of your questions and answer your questions. So we don't want the show goes by so fast. We don't want to wait till the last minute. So put your questions in the chat so he can answer them before we get off of the show. Keena says, this is Keena Cravison. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Keena. You guys, when you say hello or whatever you want to say where you're from so we can see, because we know when Dr. Walters is on, this is an international conversation. So we want to shout out where everybody is from as well as your name. Thank you for watching, Keena. Everybody put in the chat where you are streaming from, watching us from. And I'm going to bring my co-host on, Sandra Lee, right now, and she can join us and have a brief conversation before Dr. Walters joins us. Good evening, Sandra Lee. How are you today?
I am alive and well. I am so excited today that Dr. Walters is on. It was so good last week. I mean, 2 weeks ago or however long it was just so good. It just wasn't enough time. So we're not even going to talk long at all, Sharon, because we are really waiting with bated breath for Dr. Walters to come on.
Yes, we are. And when Sandra Lee doesn't want to talk long, then
Wow.
now you know Dr. Walters must be some kind of special person.
How? That's the truth. Because I'm quick to talk immediately.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, without further ado, we are going to bring on Dr. Walters right now. When you see me looking down, it's because I'm in the chat chatting with people and trying to get the comments up on the screen so I can let everybody know who's watching and I can shout everybody out. So, it's not that I'm not paying attention, it's just that I'm doing double duty until, someone can assist me in this matter. So, without further ado, Dr. Walters, how are you, sir? Welcome back to Faith Walk, the intersection of life and faith.
Hi, Sharon and Sandra. I am doing very well. God is good, and I am blessed. Busy as usual, but God is good, and what I'm doing is meaningful. So I'm excited to be back and to engage the audience, and as I share on this very important topic.
Yes, a very important topic. And just as, because we spoke behind the scenes, just as Sandra and I got tons of feedback when Dr. Walters was on in June, he as well got tons of feedback, text messages, emails, phone calls about doing a part two and just how much insight and was gained and knowledge. So, and this is an ongoing conversation.
Right.
This is not something, last time in June, an hour. This is an hour because this impacts the lives, right, of individuals in from birth till death, right?
Right.
Because we carry these things with us. So
Mhm.
we don't want to stop the conversation. It's an ongoing conversation. And Dr. Walters and I are behind the scenes trying to work something out where we can have an ongoing conversation, not just here and there. But we'll let you know when we finish the final touches on that. And you'll be happy with what we come up with, I'm sure. So without further ado, I'm
All
going
right.
to let Dr. Walters first. What are you going to be sharing with the audience this evening? What's the specific topic under Black women and their fathers? What's the specific topic you're talking about tonight?
Well, first of all, I want to give a little recap on where we were last time. And then I want to really focus in on the concept of father void and father hunger. I want to unpack that a little bit and talk about what that is and reckon with the notion of hope, loss, and disappointment in the context of understanding what father void is and father hunger. So I'm going to be really digging into that a little deeper to help our audience understand and engage.
Okay, awesome. Well, Sandra and I are going to leave the screen right now so you can take it away and share what you need to share. All right. And we will be back.
All right.
Sorry, I removed the wrong person.
Well, welcome all of you, wherever you are, friends and clients and colleagues and people of God. It's good to be here again and to share some very important things. So, I want to do a little recap of where we were last time and what I shared as a kind of springboard to what I want to share today. And so, there are some critical points I want to make. Last time, as we talk about understanding Black women and their fathers, I began by putting in context because context is everything. Context is not everything, but context is everything. And so, if we want to talk about Black women in particular and their fathers, we need to think about that in the context of culture, the context of history. So, I suggested that we have to have that conversation by keeping in mind all of us who are descendants of slaves. We have to look at those from the diaspora. So, whether you are here in the United States or some of you may be joining from the Caribbean or the UK, that we're all descendants of slaves. We understand that we come out of a history that involves slavery. So, we have to talk about the impact of colonialism, the impact of post-slave society. We have to talk about the impact in the United States of Jim Crow, of ongoing racism, and of a slave economy in society, and the way in which that has helped to shape male and female relationships, how we think about each other as men and women, and how that impact family, how the slave economy and the organization of a society based on a slave economy affected relationships, affected how fathers see themselves, and how they engage in post-slavery society and right through contemporary society. The second thing I want to note is that I emphasize that when we look very early in the psychological literature, going back to the work of Sigmund Freud, who is one of the foundational fathers of modern psychology, we see that the focus psychologically was looking at the relationship between the mother and the child. And I should say that part of my involvement in the interest of father-daughter relationship came out of some personal experiences, but importantly from an academic perspective, noting that there was very little work done on the father-daughter. A lot of the focus was on the mother-child relationship. And so I highlighted that what is critical, what we know from research, what I know that I've seen clinically in my work as a father and raising two daughters, in my work as a therapist and working with many women, all of who have fathers, and that's so important. All women can relate to this because all women have a father. And what I know from my own research during my doctoral work is that fathers, here's what I want to say, fathers make a significant imprint on the child and on daughters, very significant impact on daughters, on their cognitive development, on the emotional development, their psychological development. So when we look at fathers and daughters, we see the imprint in a number of areas. One, in the area of identity. So, how a daughter comes to see herself, how she sees herself is critical. And fathers make a tremendous impact on that. The second thing I noted is that fathers make an imprint on her development. And I'm going to talk a little more about that and unpack that tonight as I talk about Father Void, and also on her self-esteem. I'm going to come back and talk about that. And finally, on her relationship. I'm going to talk about that paradigm as well. And the research certainly suggests that. So I talked about father memories, the notion that it's not so much who your father was or is, but who you remember him to be. So the notion of father memories is critical as we understand how to flesh out the psychological impact of fathers on daughters. So tonight I want to get into what I'm looking at, which is father void and father hunger, to unpack more critically what happens psychologically that impacts the daughter. Now, so the issue of hope, the issue of disappointment, and the issue of loss is critical. And I want to look at those three things towards the end of what I want to share: hope, disappointment, and loss. Now, so when we think about relationships, and I'm zeroing in on the father-daughter, a lot of what I share can be applied to boys as well, but there is some uniqueness about the father-daughter, and that is my focus. So we have to think about nurture versus nature. Now, nature is biology, right? And so when we talk about the relationship, we have to look at what is normal development, that there are certain things that we need to develop healthy. We need certain things to develop healthy physically. But my focus, of course, is on the emotional, the psychological, the mind, the psyche, our soul, that inner part of who we are essentially. That across development, every child, every daughter needs some things, because human beings are need seeking individuals. That a lot of our behaviors, a lot of what we do is driven by needs. We have physical needs, of course. Some of you had dinner already. You had breakfast today. We have physical needs, but we also, and I talked about this last time, not just spiritual, we are essentially spirit. We live in a body and we have a soul. So there's this three parts to us, this tripart notion that we essentially spirit. We're not body. Our bodies are just a house. We're spirit. Essentially, that spirit is who we are, that God, it comes from God. The word says in Genesis that when God created Adam, the first human being, the first man, the first male, the word said that God breathed into him. He was just flesh, and he, Adam, became a living soul. That Hebrew word that speaks to spirit, right? We're spirit, and that's what returns to God. We live in our bodies, so this body is just a temple, it's a house, and we have a soul. So the soul is what I'm talking about and what we're dealing with. And so in the soul part of us, we have needs. When a child comes into the world, when a daughter comes into the world, there's certain social, emotional, and psychological needs. So, so as I talk about this, there's what we might call optimum development. We know that there's nothing perfect in life, nothing perfect under the sun, nothing lasts forever, but God. So when a daughter is born into a family, we think of her development. There's certain things that need to happen. We talk about optimum development. And when some of those things are not done, when those needs are not met, we have consequences, which means, of course, that all of us are screwed up because our fathers are and we're not perfect. Our parents are and we're not perfect. And in the course of life, we may not necessarily get all of what we need when we need it. And so my conversation tonight, my discussion tonight is focused on the early development. That's nature, those first critical years of life, and the daughter's relationship and attachment or lack thereof with her father, what she needs. So we have nature on the one hand, but then we have nurture. Nurture is culture, all right? Every child comes into the world, Freud would say we come as a blank slate. We have the genes of our parents, but then there are things that happen. So we have to look at culture. There are messages that our culture give us about who we are, who we're supposed to be, how boys are to be, how girls are to be, how daughters are to be, how fathers are to be. And so when we think about that relationship, the father-daughter relationship, we have to think as well about the way in which culture shapes the expectations that we have of father, of which culture thinks about the role of father, what we call gender roles. That has to be part of the conversation in understanding that dynamic. So there is the what I call intrapsychic, the inner elements of what is needed for the daughter. But then there's the culture, and then there's the history, and particularly when we talk about Black women and their fathers, we have to talk about the history of Black family. And so history at a lot of different levels. There's personal history. In each home, a child will have a relationship with her father, whether he is resident or not. So there are individual differences. We have to account for that. There's some generalities in terms of what's needed. We all need a lot of the same things. We need the same things. But then there are individual histories. Each person have the story. I think I said last time, our lives are a collection of stories. And that's a lot of what I do in my work as a therapist. I listen to stories. That each daughter, each woman's story is going to be shaped differently depending on the family in which she grew up, depending on whether her father was resident in the home or non-resident, dependent on the relationship, the connection she had with her father. And what I emphasized last time is the notion of father presence. That father presence is not physical presence, because we can have fathers who are physically present but emotionally unavailable. What's more significant is the emotional connection, the attachment. We know that human beings are capable of forming deep connection, deep emotional bonds. We call that attachment. And when a daughter comes into the world, when a girl comes into the world, she has this desire to connect. So there's the personal history, there's the community history, the history of the nation. Then we have to bring in culture, how we were taught about family. In some families and cultures, we're taught about what the role of the man is, what the role of the father is. And in those cultures and communities where the emphasis is on provision, the father as a provider, as a protector, those P words that many of us were influenced by that, then that has implications for the emotional connection. Because there's a sense in which if we try to understand Black women and their fathers, we have to think about the culture and the messages that we receive about how a father connects to his daughter. Is his role essentially one of providing or protecting, or is he a nurturer? And there are stereotypes about fathers not being nurturers, that they're there to protect and to provide. And so some things are culture and not necessarily nurture, and some things that are culture overlap and intersect. And then the third thing with respect to nurture is trauma. We have to think about the way in which trauma I'm describing very simply as emotional wounds, as psychic wounds, experiences we have that shape us, that have indelible mark on our psyche, adverse experiences that affect us, and we get stuck. That when we have adverse experiences that are difficult, we get stuck. Our brain processes those events and experiences in a particular way. And we carry with us those wounds, those emotional wounds. Always remember that the past is always the present when we take it with us. And so those wounds, the impact, the trauma of a father himself is affecting how he relates to his daughter. And the relationship between the father and his daughter affects how that daughter intersects and responds in the future. So much of what I'm talking about then is this interaction, this intersection between culture, nature, nurture, and nature. All right. So when we think about our lives, then there are two lifetime needs. We have a need, human beings are hardwired for two things, essentially. We're hardwired for survival. And when I say hardwired, I'm talking about what is inside of us, the way we were created, and how our brains are wired. Human beings are wired, our brains are wired for connection, for relationship, for attachment. We crave connection. And so there's the security needs, the need to connect. And then there's validation, which helps us with identity. And these are two critical areas of the daughter's connection with her father. Now, so when we look at culture, then the father is an authority figure, and we can look all across cultures. We look at Western cultures, and we've been influenced by Western cultures, those of us from the diaspora, meaning those of us who were brought from Africa. We're all over the West, the United States, Central and South America and the Caribbean. And then those who migrated, those of my audience who are in the UK, who migrated to parts of Europe. But we all came from the continent. And when we look at those cultures, and when we look at Middle Eastern cultures, all right, when we look at European culture, father as a concept represents authority. That's a common conceptual notion across cultures, in Eastern cultures and Western cultures, the authority figure of a father. And we should not also ignore, I think this is important. I'm not going to dwell on it because I could go into that deeply, but the concept of God as Father. So from Christianity, when we think about Father, when we think about God, God is described as Father. So we have to understand the way in which theologically, socially, culturally, the word father connotes a certain notion. And one of the critical notions of that is authority. So we have authority. And then the assumption of physical presence. Because of culture and experiences, there are certain assumptions that we have about the father's presence or lack of presence. And I think over time, and this is true in families where the father was not present, that we have in our communities histories of father absence. I said last time that the father's absence from the family is the greatest challenge of the last two generations. Men going off to war, the killing of men in our communities, not just the killing of Black men, but the incarceration of men as a second form of slavery, the mass incarceration. As my friend and colleague Brian Stevenson would describe it, as the mass incarceration of Black men in the United States as another form of slavery. And so in our families, I'm talking here about Black families, there is some subtle and not so subtle assumptions about the father's presence. That it's not expected that he's there. There's a lowering of the bar, the lowering of expectations. Because we've had, in many communities, families, children being raised by single mothers. And I believe that that has had a significant impact on the expectations of fathers and the lowering of those expectations. So think about how the culture shapes how we think about fathers and a father's role in the life of his daughter. And we still struggle, I think, with the notion of fathers as nurturers. And I cited last week some very important work that's done by Dr. Carl Pruitt out of Harvard, where he has looked over the years at, the book is called Father Need, How Father Care is as Important as Mother Care. That research has shown that children who are raised in environments where the father is the primary caretaker, so he's more the nurturer, that their psychological and emotional outcomes are no less than if the mother is the primary nurturer. So it's important to understand that the expectation of a father's relationship with his daughter that those expectations are connected to the experiences of Black men and Black fathers, and the lowering of expectations in many instances, particularly around nurturing, and in instances where the father is just seen as provider and protector. And when he's not even that, that's significant. And so the prevalence and success of single mothers undermines the importance of fathers, the expectations. I remember an instance years ago. I was in church on Mother's Day, on Father's Day, and the fathers were asked to stand. And then the mothers who were raising children as single mothers were also asked to stand. And I think that's an affront. I was not happy with that. I think that's an affront to fathering and fatherhood. As I said last time, I hold my hat off to single mothers who've worked very hard to raise children, to raise daughters who are relatively stable, to raise boys who are relatively stable. But a mother can never teach a man how to be a boy, how to be a man. And we can acknowledge, we don't do that on Mother's Day. We don't ask men to stand. So what I'm saying is that the importance of fathering and fatherhood gets further minimized because of the father absence that we've had. The absence of men in the family, and women having to care and be not only nurturers, but in many cases, providers. And so that shaped as well a daughter's expectation, the way in which she was raised to think about. Fathers provide a kind of regulatory function that help to regulate. The father is seen as a powerful person, a powerful object. Object here meaning person. In some sense, mysterious, as the opposite of the mother, as separate to the mother. That there are periods in a girl's life when her connection with her father is critical as she transitions from her connection to mother as, in terms of mother as the same sex parent, and father as the opposite sex. The father, as I said last time, a father is the first man in a girl's life, and her sense of femininity partially is defined by that relationship, the relationship to the opposite sex parent. And so there are periods in a girl's life. I remember my daughter, when she was 7 and 8 and so on, I remember coming home and she would just run to me, Daddy, Daddy. There's something about a little girl and seeing her father that gives her a sense of strength and support, that she wants that connection to this opposite sex parent. So when we look at the security needs, then the daughter's connection to her father gives her a sense of safety. Psychologically, she comes to believe, I am safe, because security creates that psychological sense of safety. I am safe because I have a connection, and I am loved To feel safe and to feel love are critical to a girl's sense of security. And then there is validation. Oh my goodness. So father too becomes a soothing object, but she feels a sense of validation. Validation suggests, I exist. I exist. I also recall my second daughter when she was 8 and 9 and 10 and would walk downstairs on a Sunday morning, dressed for church. And it was so important for daddy to see her. And she would say, Daddy, oh, she want me to see her. And of course, I would tell her that she's the most beautiful. She's so beautiful. Daddy loves you. Oh my goodness. I would make a big deal about her. That validation, what it gives to the daughter is I exist. I have value. I have worth. That the father gives her a sense of worth. She doesn't have to be searching for it later. If she has that validation from her father, I exist, I have value, I have worth, that is critical. So security and validation are critical. So just think, let me transition to void, father void and hunger. So father void really refers to the emptiness that a daughter feels. The many daughters grow up with this deep emptiness because of that lack of connection, an emotional and psychological void, which plays out in her development, as I said, her self-esteem. Self-esteem is very different to self-concept. Self-concept is how we see ourselves. It's more, it's cognitive, it's mind. Self-esteem, so when we have we have a concept of ourselves, is how we see ourselves, that image. So let's say I am worthless. All right. Self-concept. Self-esteem is our evaluation of what we see. And so if we think about a mirror, the self-concept then is when we look what we see, what the mirror says to us. All right. What it shows us will be self-concept. How we feel about what we see is self-esteem. And that is one area, I want you to hear me, where a father makes an indelible imprint on a daughter. Her self-esteem, her sense of worth and value, and her identity, then how she sees herself. Self-concept, self-identity. All right. Same. And then finally her relationships. And so father void, this emptiness, this emotional, psychological emptiness, leads to father hunger, which is this deep yearning that a daughter has for father presence, even when he's not there. And so the question, of course, well, if he's not there, well, it doesn't matter. Oh, it does matter. I call it the power of the absent father, that the father is even more powerful. Imprint is deep when he is not present. And that father void, that hunger is there. It exists. I said we are hardwired for connection. Girls need to connect with fathers. And actually, the nature of that connection or attachment, which provides security, has implication for her sense of survival. And how she survives and exists in the world is connected to that. So we have a void, an emptiness, where there is lack of connection, lack of presence. And so the daughter has a wish. All children have a wish. Many of these wishes early on in development are unconscious. So wish and fear are two sides of the same coin. The wish is what you're trying to get. We're all trying to get something from our relationships. The wish is one side, what we're trying to get. The fear is the other side, what we're trying to prevent. The daughter has some wish, some expectations of her father, which is influenced some by biology, the psychology, how we are wired, and some by culture, what she's taught, and how she comes to believe what the expectations that she has of her father. And then there is a response that when the father is not present, when there is not a connection, it affects her expectations and ultimately her fear. So how does it present? How does father void present? Well, there are feelings of abandonment. A daughter feels abandoned. There is this emotional pain. Where's my dad? Why didn't my dad show up? Why was he never here? Why did he never call? Children always have questions. And because they don't say what their questions are, doesn't mean that the questions do not exist. She has emotional and psychological impact, insecurity. She may struggle with insecurity. Not having that constant presence of father in her life. Her self-esteem, as I said, how she values herself, her sense of worth. And I can't tell you how many women I have worked with, and how many women I've seen in my work and in my life, my personal life, women I know who poor relationships with their fathers have shaped so much how they value themselves. That has implications for a lot of other things, especially in relationships. So part of the fire that void is this deep sense of feeling unloved. And the presence of a mother is critical, but it can't replace that. And the daughter struggles with her identity, her sense of, or if I talk about the way in which last time fathers give the daughter a sense of autonomy, that connection is critical. And she not only feels abandoned and rejected, and she feels confused as well. And so when we think about the void, then we have to understand that void shapes her in critical ways. Not only feelings of abandonment, but trust issues, issues of trust in people generally, but particularly trust in men. Because if the first man in my life is not available and never was available, remember this. Our first relationships, the first relationship I have with my father, if I'm a little girl, my first relationship formed the template for all other relationships. So I don't expect men to be available. I can't trust them. I don't know if they're going to be there. And that is critical. It affects the daughter's attachment style, the way in which she connects in relationships, and the way in which she seeks validations in her life. And so that father void, then, that hunger exists and is critical. It's critical. That the void says that I don't have value. And so one of the things I want to say as I kind of wind down here is one of the things we see is a re-representation, because when we don't have our needs met, and there's conflict. The daughter comes to understand that there is daddy, and I have some needs. I want to know who this man is. I want to connect. And it becomes confused about the absence of that. So we create what we call a cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is when we have two things that are contradictory: thought patterns, values. And the way we all manage cognitive dissonance is we tell ourselves certain things so that we can make sense of it. The daughter comes to tell herself, and this is psychologically true, because all of us make adjustments to deal with our realities. So if I need, and the father doesn't give, I tell myself I don't need. It is a psychological re-representation of the need. And so you hear women say, well, I don't need Ben. I didn't need him. You hear that. I didn't need him, right? So there's a minimization of the need, and we can find that the women can even devalue their needs, the emotional and psychological needs. So I don't need, and then that can also have implications for her parenting style. Just imagine how she might parent her daughters. Not to have expectations of men. You don't really need him. I didn't need, I turn out okay. I've seen those patterns. And girls raised by strong women in the absence of fathers who come to have low expectations of fathers, low expectations of men. And that lack of a need, that re-representation, I need. When I don't get, I tell myself I don't need. But that gets translated then into the minimization of the need, but the minimization over time of fathering and fatherhood. That's what I'm saying. That in an environment where there's a lot of father absence, the need for father, the psychological need, becomes re-represented as not needing. So the question, of course, is what happens if I never had a father, if I never knew him? Do I still have a void? Absolutely. Remember, because you're not aware of it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. There's what we call unconscious unawareness, which is simply you don't know what you don't know. There are things that we're not aware of in our body. It doesn't mean that it doesn't affect us because we're not aware of it. We go to the doctor and we hear stuff that we have no idea what's going on in our body. We weren't aware of it, but it was affecting us. And so I want you to understand, because you did not have a relationship with your father and you never knew who he was, even if he died when you were very young or before you were born, you are a prime candidate for father void. How can I have a void if I never had a connection? You see, that's a misnomer. I think psychically, I think biologically, I think the way that God has created us is for these connections with our parents. We yearn them. Well, let me ask you this question, rhetorical, of course, as I close. What happened? We see so often that children who are raised by adopted parents, at some point in their lives, they start searching. They want to know who their mom is and dad is. Where does that come from? Even when they have parents, adopted parents who are loving and nurturing, that there is, I believe, a psychic need. There's a deep connection and yearning for father. And no wonder in the last book of the Old Testament, it talks about the day coming when the hearts of the children will be turned to their fathers and vice versa, the fathers to the children. There's something about fathering and fatherhood. And so if you did not know him, you never met him, and you didn't have him, do not delude yourself that you do not have a father void. The void is deep. The hunger is deep. And so I'm going to stop here. Out of that void is
Thank you.
disappointment and loss.
Thank you, Dr. Walters, for a wonderful, informative class. That's what this was. This was a class, a teaching class, which is great. We do have a few questions for you. One, I'm just going to ask, just because it's the last thing you were talking about. When there's the father void, how does that then impact the Black woman who then gets married or a long-term relationship, not knowing the father and all the things that have happened based on what you just described? And how does she then look at her husband as a male and what his role is, as well as when, say, she has a daughter? How does that affect how she looks at her husband?
So, very good question. I think it's important. So when I began by talking about nature and nurture, and what is optimum, that one of the things in families is that when there's an absence of a parent or a connection, we have other individuals who step in, right? We've come from communities of intergenerational patterns and extended families. And so that daughter, there are some things that she might learn along the way about men. But essentially, that father void, how it will present. Well, she will have a desire for a relationship. It's very normal. We all want to love and be loved. That's essentially human. So those women seek relationships too. And so one of the things that could happen is that, as I talked earlier about lowering the bar, she may have lower expectation of her husband, or she will definitely play out her father void with her husband, and that may present itself in the way in which she may or may not feel confident, the way in which she may overcompensate for what she did not learn from her own father. The way in which, and this is an interesting area, that a husband, she may unconsciously even seek from her husband some of that kind of validation that she needed from a man. And I think that not that her husband is her father, but we all play out our issues in our intimate relationships, our father issues, our mother issues. And that's why marriage is such a beautiful and fascinating relationships, because we bring our baggage, we bring our relational dynamic into our intimate relationships. So that void will present itself in areas in which there's reliance, in areas in which she connects with her husband, in areas in which the expectations she has of her husband, which might be lower. And some of that too is tempered by what she may have been taught, right, by her mom about men. All right. And because often in our communities, in our families, when the father is really just not there, mothers communicate messages about him. Some of those messages are negative messages, and some might be positive messages. But her relationship and her interaction with her husband is also going to be tempered by the messages that she received from those adults that raised her about her father and about fathering. and that partly will shape her interaction as well. I hope that answers the question.
Absolutely. We have a question from Donna. And Donna says the importance of fathering and fatherhood is minimized because mothers accept responsibility because they have to instead of want to. So the question is for her, why don't fathers accept responsibility for the same?
Thank you, Donna, for your question. I certainly can't speak or will not attempt to speak for specific men, but what I will say is this. So I talk about, that's why I began with context, right? So we have to understand the Black man. We have to understand what has happened to Black men. It's not excuse. It's just reality. There are lots of reasons why men don't step up, and it's a multiplicity of things that sometimes a man's abandonment of his father, his family, is connected to some of his own security, his own insecurity. Many men were not fathered themselves. A lot of men did not learn from their fathers what it means to be a father. So I can't be a father if I didn't see it modeled. Or what the template I got was that I'm to go to work and just provide. That I'm not the nurturer. That's what mom does. So I don't need to take her out, my daughter out on dates, or I don't need to. And so when we have this conversation, we also have to have a conversation about what's happening and what has happened to Black men. What has the society done, and ways in which we have provided excuses for men or let men off the hook. We have to talk about male privilege. There's male privilege in our society, in our culture. There's male privilege in Black family. Let's understand that. And just as there is white supremacy, we can talk about male supremacy. And men often are let off the hook. So we have to hold men accountable, right? So, but there are a multiplicity of reasons. In the book I'm writing, there's a section I talk about understanding reading your father's novel. And reading your father's novel is based on the notion that every person's life is worth a novel, that we all have stories. And it's important to hear the stories of men, to understand why men, in instances, have abandoned their families. In Black communities, of course, as I said earlier, we have to look at mass incarceration. We have to look at what slavery and post-slavery society and racism has done to our psyche. We're going to have some conversations about Black men. And so there are a whole lot of reasons. And I don't think personally that men abandon their families because they're bad men. There's always a story. There's always a story. We can talk about drug use. Many Black men haven't stood up because they're addicted. And so there are multiple reasons. And they're always a reason for everything a human being does. There's a reason, right? They're not excuses, they're explanations, they're reasons. And we need to have conversations about why that is. And some of that relates to what we expect, right?
So, Dr. Walters, we have one final question from Charity. And Charity says, so do you also feel the same as for my son? As for sons, my son did not have their father around.
Yeah. Good question. So what I lay out, of course, my focus was on daughters. There are similar patterns because attachment and security is attachment and security for all. All children need to feel attached and connected. So yes, we see a lot of the same pattern. Things split out because there's some gender differences, of course, and there's some differences in terms of gender role expectations, what we expect from boys, what we expect from girls. And so, for example, in instances with the father and the daughter, there's certain things we expect of the girl. Boys are taught generally, you know, that they're to man up, that they're to be strong, that we operate out of our strength and not weakness, that we're strong and we're not weak. So the messages that a boy comes to, the things he comes to believe about himself as a boy and his sense of masculinity is is going to impact how he responds to his own father void. So there are differences, uh, some biology, but also culture in terms of how boys are taught about their own sense of masculinity, which is going to shape how they handle father void. But boys experience father void very similar to girls. And often we will see a lot more acting out, right? Um, and they carry a lot of the same pain. The essential thing, and this is God's original divine intention for us, children need both parents. Our sons and our daughters both need their fathers and their mothers. And that's what's optimum. The world is broken and not perfect, but an optimum setting, both parents provide the kind of security and validation that help children to grow and be relatively stable and healthy psychologically, degree to which those connections are able to happen. Given all of our flaws and all of the imperfection that exists in the world and in our families. Question: what impact professional women have on children when they do not allow them to relate, only wanting the child but not the man? Um, so, well, let me try to see if I understand the question. Well, I'm not sure about the emphasis on professional women. Um, okay, so I'm assuming that this question, Graveny Bannister, thanks for your question. I'm assuming that this question it sounds like it's referencing instances where, because I'm thinking about the word professional women. One of the things we see, a pattern that is certainly happening in the United States, I can speak a little more authoritatively about the US. It may be happening in the Caribbean as well. But there's more and more, and particularly as we have with all the technology, more and more growing pattern of women. And as a question asked, a lot of them are professional women who want a child. And, IV and all of that now. And, we can freeze our eggs and all of that stuff. That stuff is happening these days. And women are, and yeah, they're professional women often because this stuff is expensive. Um, and they're women who are having children. They want a child. That's biology. But not a connection. And in a lot of these instances, they don't even know the father. Well, we have a whole nother can of worms here because we're having children who are coming into the world, and there's that. I mean, that's huge father void. But then the question becomes: is there a father figure that there needs to be? The father hunger is about the yearning for a father present. So, is there someone that are able to take that role on? and I'm not sure if we know enough about yet. And I'm sure that someone might be studying this, or we need to study this. What those children look like, who are uh, where women have, uh, they pay for sperm and to have a child, but there's no father because there's anonymous donors. That is a trend that's happening, and it would be interesting to study what that looks like for those children, and some of that I think is going to be tempered by whether those women have male presence and fathering objects, in their lives. Um,
Dr.
so
Walters, the lady's question that you answered, she added to it. She says minimizing the father's role when the relationship goes south, and
got it.
she
Yeah.
also added total independence. She said
Yes.
that as
Yes.
well.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things when relationships end, and we see this, sometimes divorce is very nasty, and grown people don't always behave like adults, right? And so I think it's important to understand that if you and the man don't work out, if you and the father don't work out, the father is critical to that child, that you ought to be mature enough not to get in the way. You don't have to have a relationship with him, but the two of you have to be able to have a process where this child is not hidden from the father. If there are issues of abuse, that's another issue, right? But I think in those instances, it's important that women, that mothers understand the value of that daughter or that son having a relationship with their father. But unfortunately, that sometimes people are not mature enough to handle um, when there are breakups, when relationships end, whether they're married or not. They're not mature enough, and we take out a lot of our disappointment, loss, and hurt, and feelings for the man out in. And there's something called parental alienation syndrome. I've presented that at conferences. Maybe at some point we may have a conversation about that. Yeah, but that child can suffer from parental alienation syndrome. It is actually a thing where children are kept from one parent, and we see that in often the interest are where it happens is instances of divorce. And Donna, so where we have instances of incest, that's major trauma. You know, any girl who has a father who molested her is that's trauma, right? And that girl will have post traumatic stress disorder. And so the best way to deal with that is psychotherapy. That's my recommendation. At some point, when you are violated sexually, particularly by someone, it's an inappropriate relationship, inappropriate connection in the first place. So a lot of healing that has to happen, a lot of confusion for girls, and my experience and my professional sense of that is that you don't get healing from that unless you confront it. And the best way to do that is to work on that, find a good therapist to work through that, because that's a deep wound. To be molested by your father, that really messes you up, really messes you up. And I guarantee you it's going to be difficult for that girl to have healthy relationships with men. And those things don't go away. And because you love Jesus, if I could just say that, doesn't mean that it's going to go away. So you cannot conquer what you do not confront. So ultimately, we have to confront areas of trauma, and so we can be healed.
Thank you so much, Dr. Walters, for answering all those questions and just providing so much information and insight. Unfortunately, we have to end. We didn't, but we obviously will come back another day to just
Did
have.
you turn the audience is gone?
I'm sorry, say that. Oh, no, we're still live.
Okay.
Yes. So, Sandra Lee, any words for the audience or for Dr. Walters?
Dr. Walters, wow. Wow, wow, wow.
Yeah.
The time ran by. It was just so much information explained so well. I just got so much out of it, but it's like, oh my God, I'm looking at the time and all of the good questions. And I don't know, Dr. Walters, this just might have to be, a once a month type of visit that you come on the show, because it's just not enough time, because there's so many questions and so many answers, and it goes deeper and deeper. And so I just want to thank you so much for being on the show. It was just so informative, and I'm sure the audience got a lot out of it, because again, I'm sure there's other questions that we couldn't even see or get to, but just thank you so much. It was just mind-blowing. We got to work something out.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Dr. Walters and I are working.
Karen and I are working on something. We
Okay.
can't make an announcement yet, but we're working on something.
Yes, but it's going to be great.
Okay.
So hold on, it's going to be great. We're working on something great for you guys. Dr. Walters, can you share with the audience, because you have a book that you've already written and you have a book that you're working on. Can you share a little bit about that and where they can get the one that you already have that they can purchase?
That book is called Daddy's Girl, A Psychological Examination of the Father-Daughter Bond. And you can find that on Amazon. The book that I've been working on for several years is called Daddycation, Bonding, Brokenness, and Building in the Father-Daughter Journey. And so just keep me in prayer. Much of what I talk about tonight, or have in the last these two parts, are in the book. And I'm looking forward to having that finished and published.
Dr. Walters, how about any contact information that you would like to give out to the audience? Or
yes, so you can go to my website, www.randolphwalters.com. That website is for my practice, Randolph Walters and Associates, which is a counseling and psychotherapy practice here in Philadelphia. My phone number is 610-639-1729, 610-639-1729. That is also on the website. You can also Google me and find me in different places on the internet. I don't have Instagram and all that other stuff. I'm not active on social media. I do have a Facebook page, for the practice, but I'm not active in some of the other social media sites.
That's okay. We know how to reach you.
Right.
So, thank you.
My email, rwa@gmail.com. RWA, which stands for Randolph Walters and Associates. rwa@gmail.com.
Thank you, everyone, for watching. Those of you who may not have made a comment, thank you for watching. We know sometimes people don't like to comment, and that is totally fine, but it's the information that you got from the dialogue. So we appreciate you watching. All of you who engaged, thank you so much for engaging. People who watch on the replay, please still comment and ask questions, because I will forward those questions to Dr. Walters, and he will answer them the next time he's on the show. And there will be a next time. So, and anyone else who may have a question, Full Life Communications, which is the platform you're watching this show on, fulllifecommunications@gmail.com. Put questions in for Dr. Walters in the subject box, and then I will forward those questions to him. So next time he's on the show, he can answer your questions about father-daughter relationships. He's an expert on father-son relationships as well. And so you can ask him questions about that. He's also an expert on anger management. Dr. Walters, why don't you just share a few things that you're an expert in? So if they have questions about that, then they can ask you these questions as well, and you can answer them next time.
Well, trauma is certainly one of my areas of expertise. I've done a lot of work. I currently do a lot of work in trauma. Relationship issues. I do a lot of couples therapy. Premarital counseling is one of my areas of expertise. There are not a lot of psychologists or clinicians that do that. So I have a special program and I work with couples to prepare them for marriage, and do a bit of that. I have some clients I'm working with now, preparing them for marriage. I do a lot of couples work. I particularly enjoy working with couples on their relationship. So I would consider myself an expert in relationship. I've done work on male psychology, created a course on masculinity and male psychology, understanding, counseling men and boys, manhood stuff, and issues of diversity and cultural competence, equity and belonging, those kinds of issues, cultural issues. And a lot of them connect with, work that I've done at the university for 30 years in terms of teaching and professional work, conferences and things I've done. So spirituality, very committed to spirituality, integrating spirituality and biblical spirituality into psychology and counseling. So I'm very deeply committed to that as a man of faith, the importance of the faith factor in confronting the brokenness in the world. And so bringing together the world of science and social science and psychology and the world of theology and biblical understanding together to help people to grow. So yeah, those are some of the areas I would say that, areas of expertise for me.
Okay, excellent. Well, we've got a lot of people who are waiting with bated breath for the next time you're on the show. So we know it won't be long. So thank you again, Dr. Walters. Thank
Sure.
you, Sandra Lee, for joining me again on another great, wonderful day that the Lord has made. Thank you, audience, for watching live and on
Thank
the
you
replay.
everyone for joining.
Yes. And so we love you all. We appreciate you helping us build this platform by being engaged with us. We really want to get this information out. It is past time for us to be healed and to be free in Christ.
That's
right. And so we are all here in this together to be free in Christ. Christ has given us this assignment, and we are building the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven, because we want to be strong individuals to do our kingdom assignment, but we have to be strong mentally and emotionally, as well as physically and spiritually. But a lot of times we forget the mental and emotional part, which is so important. And so that is the reason why the Lord has commissioned me to do, this is my assignment as a professional clinician, as well as building this media platform to get this message, his message, because this is the Lord's work. This is the Lord's message to get this out to the masses. So we thank you for coming, undergirding us with this by your presence, your questions, your comments, liking the Facebook page, subscribing to the YouTube channel. If you haven't already, do that right now. Like the video and share it. Don't keep this to yourself.
Right.
We want to build this. This is for everyone. We want everyone to be healed, to be whole, and to be set free. So we can't keep the information to ourselves.
Right.
And on that, we're going to say good night. We love you. God bless you all. Shalom.
Yes. All right. Thank you for watching. Good night.